Good morning. Today we are very happy to welcome Professor Junya Nishino to the Asian Society Policy Salon, Japan. We are all interested in ROK-Japan relations, but it's easy to be very pessimistic as we watch the news and some rhetoric that we hear. At the same time, there seems to be some hope in the air with the new inauguration of the new president, as well as more positive attitude of some in the Japanese leadership as well. I was just going through cleaning out our house the other day and found the soccer ball from the 2002 World Cup soccer, and it just hit me that it's been 20 years since the World Cup. And things have not been so smooth since then. But today we would like to ask Professor Nishino to what to look for in terms of how we can understand the relationship going ahead. I think with the upcoming upper house election in July, we may see the advent of a longer administration in Japan as well. So with that, with the new leadership in Japan, what can we expect and what should be a little bit more cautious about? So today we'd like to start with asking Professor Nishino to give some brief opening statement, and then I will follow up some questions. But first, let me introduce Professor Nishino, that I'm sure a lot of you in the audience already know very well. He's professor at Faculty of Law at Keio University and is also the director of the Center for Contemporary Korean Studies at Keio University. He previously served as a special analyst in the Intelligence and Analysis Service of the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and as a special assistant at the Japanese Embassy in Seoul. He is very active in the U.S. as well, having been a Japan scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and visiting scholar at George Washington University and Harvard Yensing Institute. His research focuses on contemporary Korean politics, international relations in East Asia, and Japan-Korea relations. He has a BA from Keio University and earned his PhD from Yonsei University in Korea. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the mic now to Professor Nishino.
So thank you, Hikotani Sensei. It's my pleasure and honor to have an opportunity to talk about Japan-ROK relation at the Asia Society Policy Salon Tokyo today. So I will speak about the current situation and prospect of the Japan-ROK relations in 20 minutes. So as we all know, after the start of the Yoon administration in South Korea, President Yoon is making extensively making his efforts to restoring the deteriorated bilateral relations between Tokyo and Seoul. But still, the atmosphere in Japan is quite cautious. I think there is three reasons. The first one is that, so in my observation, the Japanese political leaders and the policy makers really welcome the Yoon government, but still we see that President Yoon is in a very difficult situation, especially in terms of the domestic politics. The first one is that because Yoon won the election very slight margin, only 0.73%, so his political basis is quite weak. And moreover, his ruling party is minority in South Korean General Assembly. And in addition, his supporting rate is quite low. So these are quite giving a negative impact in Yoon's foreign policy and domestic policy affairs. And the second reason is that so now we have a very difficult outstanding issue between Japan and South Korea, which is the wartime labor issue and the comfort women issue, so-called history issue. So this issue is quite difficult to solve at any time soon. So because this issue raised by the Supreme Court ruling in South Korea, And actually, I would say that even Moon administration tried hard to solve this issue, but administration of South Korea cannot solve this issue because the South Korean government administration should respect court ruling. So because of this very characteristic of outstanding issue between the two countries, Yoon government now is trying to make effort hard to solve this issue, but it will take time to solve this difficult issue. And the third reason is that we Japanese all know that in a way, bad past experience under the Lee administration and the Park Geun-hye administration. So generally speaking, that Japanese ruling party, LDP, had a very positive and friendly relationship with conservative government in South Korea. But Lee Myung-bak administration and the Park Geun-hye administration, so these two governments were conservative, but actually we had a very deteriorated relation under the Lee and the Park administration. So now we realize that not only progressive government, but also conservative government in South Korea may deteriorate bilateral ties between Tokyo and Seoul. So these all three reasons generate, in a way, very cautious and still negative atmosphere in Japan regarding the bilateral ties between Tokyo and Seoul. So, but I would say that Prime Minister Kishida now accepting at this point the Yoon government effort to restore bilateral ties. But still, I would say that Prime Minister Kishida is now trying to manage his expectation. But I will say that these are three significant events past 3 months. First one is just after the presidential election in South Korea, March 9th. So Prime Minister Kishida had a telephone call with President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol. And in April, new President Yoon sent policy delegation to Japan. And Prime Minister Kishida, not only Prime Minister Kishida, but also Foreign Minister Hayashi and the Defense Minister Kishi and the Economic Minister Hagiuda, all of these important figures in Japanese government met with this policy delegation. So Japanese government also sent a positive signal to South Korea's new government. And inauguration ceremony of the President Yoon, Foreign Minister Hayashi attended the meeting and had attended the inauguration ceremony and had a meeting with new President Yoon Suk-yeol. So this very positive signal to Yoon government. But still, the Japanese government's stance is that South Korean government, new government, should solve the outstanding issue, which is the forced labor issue. Wartime labor issue to, in a way, really restore our bilateral ties. So before restoration, Yoon government firstly should solve the outstanding issue. This is a quite consistent position of the Japanese government, even after the start of the new South Korean government. So now the new president, Yoon Suk-yeol, and his foreign policy advisors is making their effort quite hard to move forward in our bilateral ties. And President Yoon wants to realize wants to open new era of the bilateral ties between Seoul and Tokyo by realizing the so-called Kim Dae-jung Obuchi Declaration 2.0. So I really hope that we Tokyo and Seoul, realize and open the new era of our bilateral relationship. But at the same time, I can say that it's quite difficult to be back to the 1998 Joint Declaration. So I often say that three things become bigger than the 20 years ago. The first one is now bilateral relationship between Tokyo and Seoul is facing the quite difficult international relation, which is the growing presence of China. So shadow of China is quite bigger than 20 years ago. And the second one is the North Korea's military capability. So 22 years ago, still North Korea yet to conducted the nuclear test, but now we have the huge military threat from North Korea, and North Korea already conducted nuclear tests 6 times, and still deploying the ICBM and other missiles. So now we are really thinking about how can we effectively and efficiently address this very significant military threat from North Korea. And third one is now the domestic politics actually, in a way, really dominate our bilateral ties between Tokyo and Seoul. So 22 years ago, still the domestic politics is not so significant in our bilateral ties. But since 2000, now both leaders in Tokyo and Seoul really seriously consider the domestic audience than 20 years ago. So these three things are quite become bigger than 22 years ago. And we should consider these factors when we try to restore and open new bilateral ties. But I think the current international situation is, in a way, quite the important opportunity to countries. So because the Yoon administration really put its emphasis on the sustaining the liberal international order. So now the current difficult international order is in a way becoming a driving force to restoring the bilateral ties. But at the same time, we have challenges. Most important challenges is that, as I mentioned, domestic politics in both nations. Not only in South Korea, but also in Japanese citizens have a quite negative sentiment towards South Korea. In a way, after the start of Yoon administration, South Korean sentiment is, in a way, feels more kind of optimistic in terms of the restoring their relationship with Japan. But still, so as you all know, that Japanese citizens still have a very negative and cautious attitude towards South Korea's new administration. So both leaders needed to closely pay attention to these domestic audience when they try to restore bilateral ties. So given this difficult domestic political situation, not only in South Korea but also in Japan, both leaders needed to solve the outstanding issue. I think the most important and urgent issue is the wartime labor issue and liquidation of the seized Japanese asset by the court ruling of South Korean government. Fortunately, the last week, Yoon Suk-yeol administration launched a joint consultative body which attend both governmental side and the public side to find a common ground or to find a solution to solve this issue. So from the Japanese perspective, Japanese side really appreciated Yoon's strong will to solve the relationship, solve the outstanding issue. But we often say that, yes, we really appreciate Yoon's strong will, but we yet to see any tangible measure of effort. But now you launched this consultative body. I hope that the Japanese side really accept Yoon's effort and try to make joint effort to move way forward in our bilateral ties. And from South Korea's perspective, actually South Koreans more importantly think the export control issue, which posed by Japanese government in 2019. And many South Koreans think that without solving this export control issue, they really reluctant to move forward in bilateral ties. So Yoon government really want Japanese government to solve this issue. And third one is a comfort women agreement in 2015. But I think this issue is relatively not so difficult than other outstanding issues, especially the wartime labor issue. Because I think that the Yoon government tried to restore the 2015 Comfort Women Agreement. And in a way, in this context, Japanese and South Korean side can find a common ground to solve this difficult Comfort Women issue. So now the both leaders, we have to tackle these difficult outstanding issues. So lastly, what should the two leaders do at this point to move forward in bilateral ties? The first one is that both leaders and both government needed to reactivate political channel. I think that governmental level is okay. Now we can see frequent communication between two government, Kishida cabinet and the Yoon government. But the problem is that still political channel between the two nations' politicians is quite weak. So, for example, traditionally the parliamentary union, Gin Renmei, was playing a strong role, very important role in mitigating tension in two countries. But now this political channel become quite weak. So both governments needed to restore this kind of political channels. And the second one we have to is enhancing the trilateral cooperation among U.S., Japan, and ROK. Fortunately, since last year, when Biden administration started, now we see many frequent policy communication between the three countries. This is quite desirable, but still we need to see more active policy coordination among three countries. So lastly, the most important thing is that, especially after the upper house election this coming Sunday, I think that Prime Minister Kishida should exert his strong political leadership. I understand that Prime Minister Kishida still really cautious about the accept South Korea's effort because in a way, frankly speaking, there is a strong voice in ruling party about the restoring relationship with South Korea, and Kishida-san needed to be quite cautious about addressing bilateral ties. But I think after the election, I think the Kishida-san and the Japanese government should exercise strong political leadership because the wartime labor issue is quite urgent. We needed to avoid liquidation of the seized asset. So I would say that it will take long time to totally restore bilateral ties, but we need to be more urgent to stop the liquidation of the seized Japanese asset. So yes, I will stop here. I really appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a great overview of where things stand. And before we open for questions from the floor and from the wider audience, I'd like to ask you a couple of follow-up questions on the points that you made. You mentioned that there is an expectation or hope that there could be a joint declaration 2.0. I understand that that was part of the platform of President Yoon during the election. And I also have heard or vaguely remember that there was a lot of talk of the personal chemistry between Kim Dae-jung and Obuchi, Prime Minister Obuchi and President Kim, being very positive and somewhat very much conducive to such declaration. If this kind of personal leadership and that chemistry factors are in fact important, are you more hopeful now with the Prime Minister that we have in Japan and President Yoon, or are there some things to be concerned about that factor if that's very important, moving these things forward?
I think that so regarding the chemistry between two leaders and the government, I think I would say that quite hopeful. So already we saw that very friendly atmosphere when the Foreign Minister Kishida met with his counterpart Park Chin before the inauguration ceremony, and also the President Yoon. I think President Yoon is not ideological. He's quite, in a way, practical and pragmatic. And so I think also Kishida-san is not so ideological as his predecessors. So in this context, I think that the two leaders' chemistry is quite good. And one important thing is that in Yoon administration, new South Korean government, we can see many important figures who are very well known about Japan. Not only actually Foreign Minister Park Chin speaks fluent Japanese, and many other important policy advisors in Yoon government really well know about Japan. So the Japanese side needed to make use of these the figures in South Korean government.
Thank you. And on that point, I guess one of the structural features that some would like to point out that makes us think that, of course, this is the way things are going to go, is what you've mentioned in terms of both the rise of China and that and somewhat relatively show of interest in the region, but maybe the decline in the capacity for the U.S. to lead in the region. And of course, there's difficulties with how much each factors matter in each country's expense. But let me ask you first about a perception of China. I understand the perception of the U.S. and the U.S.-ROK alliance have gone up, and that has contributed to the victory, although by a small margin, of President Yoon. How about perceptions of China? In general, it's said that it has deteriorated, but what are the characteristics of that? Is there a generational difference in that? And how do you think that would impact the future in a sense? Do you think it's a long-term same trajectory, or do you think it's likely to fluctuate more depending on how China changes and how it affects domestic politics and ROK?
So I would say that every government in South Korea, they needed to sustain very, in a way, healthy relations with China. For them, China is quite important because of two reasons. First one is that the economy, the economic relationship between the Seoul and the Beijing is quite huge. And South Korea needed to sustain the positive and healthy relationship with China in terms of trade relationship. And second one is that North Korean issue. To solve North Korean issue and realize a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, South Korean government needed to gain cooperation from Chinese side. But actually, the many South Koreans think that it's quite difficult and impossible to realize the gaining cooperation from China, especially in North Korean issue. China now many South Koreans think that China doesn't want to the unification on the Korean Peninsula, and especially after the third deployment in 2070s. Now there is a really the negative sentiment dominate in South Korea's the public citizens. Now the over 80% of South Koreans are quite have a negative feeling toward China. Not only third deployment issue, actually for general South Koreans, actually air pollution issue is also quite important. Many South Koreans think that the air pollution from China, it come from China, and China does not seriously pay attention to this kind of issue. So this kind of issue really makes many South Koreans quite negative feeling toward China. And in a way, thanks to this current negative sentiment toward China in South Korea, Yoon government now is trying to how can I say, try to make a mutual respect relationship with China. So during the presidential campaign, President Yoon, the candidate Yoon said that the Moon government is really, how can I say, really tilt toward China. But candidate Yoon says that he really tried to enhance his relationship with the United States, and regarding his China policy, they want to realize mutual respective relationship with China. So, but the importantly during presidential election, one of his presidential pledge was the additional deployment of THAAD in South Korea, but I think it's not desirable for South Korea, because if Yoon really deploy additional THAAD system in South Korea, this bring the really a very harsh retaliation from China. So then now I think the Yoon government is trying to adjust his tough stance toward China, but still we need to see how Yoon government really elaborate his China policy at this point.
So you believe that the more careful approach, in a way, of ROK to China is beneficial for Japan as well? Let me turn to North Korea. This is a really basic question, but whenever we've seen many testing by North Korea since January, and when that happens, how is that reported in ROK? Like, how does that affect public opinion? Is it more of there's some more sense of a clear and present danger, or is it more of a long term, the growth of North Korean capabilities? How I'm always wondering how, like I don't watch Korean news, but when that happens, since it happens so frequently, is there a sense that it happens all the time and almost as if it's not an important news, or how important is that for ROK at this point?
So generally speaking, I would say that the South Korean think that North Korea is Korea under present danger, but as South Korean the expose the North Korea's mirror threat long time, then yes, frankly speaking, many South Koreans generally less think about. Let's think the North Korea threat as the seriously, and but one important thing that after the start of the Kim Jong-un the leadership in 2011, especially the many younger generation think that they never accept Kim regime. So the many South Koreans now think that they really don't want to see unification anytime soon. So they only want peaceful coexistence with North Korea. And given this, the domestic atmosphere, Yoon government at this point is taking very strong, tough stance toward North Korea. But at the same time, they try to realize peaceful coexistence with North Korea. But I think that for the time being, North Korea will take very tough stance, not only towards South Korea, but also towards the United States. And in this year, we may see the additional nuclear test of North Korea. So the South Korean government needed to prepare this the North Korea's provocation, and Yoon government really put its emphasis on the extended deterrence from North Korea's this growing military threat.
Thank you. Let me turn the subject a bit to maybe not something personal, but with the academic side of your work, especially with the younger generation that you mentioned. I understand that Keio has a strong relationship. Your degree is from Yonsei, but with Yonsei, and you have a 3-country project of students from, I guess it's Hong Kong now, and Yonsei and Keio, a joint type of program. And you've been working on this over the years. And I guess we shouldn't always say we should hope that the younger generation will bring change happen. But what are some, looking back in the years of working as an academic at Keio with the fellow academics in Korea and also students, what are the changes over the years that you are hopeful for, and what are the changes over the years that you might be a little bit worried about, if there's any?
So I can't see any negative feeling among the younger generation towards the South Korea and China. But frankly speaking, so in this context, yes, I'm in a way hopeful. But frankly speaking, the current bilateral tie, when we see the current bilateral ties, the problem is that. How can I say? In a way, I would say that reproduction of the history recognition, not only in South Korea but also in Japan. So younger generation, they never know about the past, unfortunate past between two countries, but the education quite matter. And the education, not only education but also social atmosphere, not only in South Korea but also in Japan quite matter. So the younger generation, they think that, especially in South Korea, think that yes, they can enjoy Japanese animation and the Japanese pop culture, but at the same time, they think that Japan in the past time really behaved badly towards South Korea. So this kind of the how can I say, perception toward Japan really reproducing currently in South Korea. So we can, I think in this context, we need to be more cautious in our future bilateral ties, and we need to seriously tackle the negative atmosphere in both countries.
Yes. That's really interesting, because when I was teaching in the US, I had very few Japanese students, but I had quite a few Korean students. And I try to make an effort to actually discuss the topics that are difficult to talk about, not to convince them otherwise, but just to have an opportunity to have a frank discussion. And because it seems like there were some preconceptions on both sides, actually, when there were some Japanese students too, but it just makes more sense for them to not be too scared to talk about these issues. Is that something you do in these kind of exchanges, that maybe the Korean students might have prior conceptions that it's not very positive? But I guess there is a selection bias that they're there to meet with Japanese students, but do you have them debate, or what kind of things do you do when the students get together?
So generally speaking, I would say that the South Koreans really know about the history, but Japanese younger generation is Japanese side. Not so the closely pay attention to the unfortunate history between the two countries. So actually this is in a way gap between the two countries. So we Japanese should know more about the unfortunate past between the two countries. But at the same time, I want to say that South Koreans, not only younger generation, but also the general South Korean citizens, should know more about our bilateral ties, especially after the 1965. So, yes, we had a very unfortunate past during wartime, but after the World War II, especially after the normalization of bilateral relationship in 1965. Yes, we had many difficult moments, but I can say that we developed our bilateral ties very healthy in a very healthy manner and a very the lively manner. So we really, I personally think that we really respect this the 50 years of our bilateral ties. So in this context, I think that I really understand the Japanese government position. So Kishida-san always said that yes, we have to make efforts to restore bilateral ties, but we needed to restore our relationship based on our the 50 years, the relationship since 1965. Actually, this is a very quite important foundation of our bilateral ties.
Thank you. So one last question, I'd like to open the floor. So you mentioned Prime Minister Kishida, and I think many do expect that the LDP is going to win one way or the other on Sunday, and how much they win will matter a lot in terms of political capital the Prime Minister might have. And if he does get a lot of political capital, he's going to have a very golden 3 years ahead of him, and that he does seem to be very interested in improving the ties between Japan and Korea. At the same time, I think in your talk, you highlighted some issues that the Japanese government would like to say it's completely in Korea's court in a way. The ball is in your court. And there's some things that Korea would say it's in our court. But in fact, you highlight areas that it's not completely in one of this court, but they have to step together. How much are you worried by the fact that since Prime Minister Kishida is more dovish in his position than Prime Minister Abe, for instance, that it will actually make it more difficult for him to do what he needs to do within the LDP because of the attacks from people who are more conservative or who might be more Korean? I'm asking this question because I was looking at some candidate surveys that are done by different newspapers. And it's quite striking that when the question is asked, who is more responsible to making progress, in the LDP, it's really split. That about more than half say that it's all about Korea, but there are some who say we both have to work together. But the potential, well, maybe not coalition, but one of the parties that might win big is also the Ishin Party, and they unanimously say that it's all in Korea's court. So it's things like this that worry me about how the decision is going to be post-election, even if Prime Minister Kishida wins. So you mentioned the role of parliamentary exchanges, but how much hope and what worries you about domestic politics going forward? Is Kishida going to have the political capital that he looks like he's getting? Or are there some things about the fact that he might be more willing to cooperate with Korea, but that ironically make his position a little bit weaker domestically, especially within the party? So your thoughts on this point?
So the many observers say that after the upcoming election, Kishida-san will or could exercise his strong leadership, not only on foreign policy side, but also on domestic politics. But I'm a bit actually skeptical. Even after the election, how can I say, internal ruling party, the internal dynamics of ruling party is not so changed, I would say. And in this context, so as Hikotani Sensei mentioned, still Kishida-san needed to address the strong conservative voice in the ruling party, and this really will give, in a way, negative impact to Kishida-san's leadership when he tried to move forward in bilateral ties. Anyway, the one positive aspect is that, as I mentioned earlier, Kishida-san is not so ideological, and not only Kishida-san but also every Japanese leader, the Japan's Asia policy is quite important at this point. So in this context, I hope that Kishida-san really exercise his strong leadership, especially in restoring his relationship with his counterpart in South Korea. So I personally hope that not only relationship with South Korea, but also Kishida-san needed to mend tie with China. But actually, frankly speaking, given the current difficult international situation, especially after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think that it's quite impossible or quite difficult to mend tie with China at this point. But South Korea is quite difficult. So South Korea, actually, we Japan share same value and share many things with South Korea. So we should restore our relationship with South Korea as soon as possible. I think the Kishida-san really realized this important fact.
So you think it will be relatively high on his agenda after the election?
Well, I hope so, but frankly speaking, but the highest priority is on foreign policy side is the enhancing the relationship with the United States. But this means that at the same time, enhancing or restoring tie with South Korea, because Biden administration really hope that the Biden want to see restoration of bilateral ties. So if Kishida-san really tried to enhance strong ties with the United States, he needed to, at the same time, to restore the bilateral ties with South Korea. This is the current, in a way, dynamics in this region.
Thank you so much. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor for questions.
Hi, Nishino Sensei. Thank you very much for your great presentation and the panel discussion. So I'd like to ask about the topic you mentioned about shadow of China, as well as you mentioned about the importance of Japan, United States, Korea relationship. So then I'd like to ask how the Korean government, the people, position themselves among Japan, China, and Korea. For example, for Japanese, if China might invade Taiwan, something, it is inevitable that will be involved in that warfare. But it seems that yes, shadow of China, also Korea is a little bit closer to mainland China. So how they are preparing for those issues for the government as well as people's mindset or consensus?
So thank you for question, Jiro-san. Yes, I would say that we watching the in a way convergence in our perception of China between Tokyo and Seoul, but still there's in a way perception gap on China. As I mentioned earlier, now the majority of South Koreans really feel negative sentiment towards China, but at the same time, they think that the relationship with China is still important, not only economically but only politically and in terms of security aspect. So in this context, I would say that China, so still in a way, even young government, I would say that South Korean government try to, in a way, strike a balance between the United States and China. Yes, the alliance with the United States is the most important priority, but any government of South Korea cannot ignore its relationship with China. In this context, Yoon government tried to realize, in a way, a strategic relationship with China. But economically, even under the Moon government, South Korea tried to, how can I say, diverse its relationship, its economic relationship. So currently, South Korea is heavily dependent on China, but now South Korea tried to diversify its relationship, external relationship. For example, Vietnam and India, other South ASEAN countries, now they really try to hard to diversify its economic relationship. But in security, on security side, frankly speaking, many South Korean does not think seriously about the contingency in Taiwan Strait. So they want to avoid, in a way, the involvement of Taiwan issue, and they want to take a distance from this kind of issue. But Yoon government, when Yoon met with President Biden last month, in the joint statement between the two leaders, so we can find the word, the importance of Taiwan Strait, peace and security of Taiwan Strait is quite important. But still, they cannot name China in the joint statement. So they really cautious about its relationship with China.
Thank you very much, Professor Nishio. Robert Dejarek from Temple University. I have a question about how Japanese officials, you think, conceptualize relations with South Korea. I mean, there are two ways of looking at it. One is, I would say, contractual. That is, there's the forced labor issue, comfort women, sex slaves, and we reach an agreement and it's done. The other one is that it's an ongoing process. In other words, it will never be, quote unquote, solved. And that therefore it's something that will have to continue to be managed. So do you think that in Tokyo policymakers look at it in a contractual basis, or do they think that this is something that just has to be handled from one generation to the other in a way that minimizes problems? Sometimes when I've spoken with Japanese officials, they seem to think that one has find a solution to one or two or three of these problems, and that once it's done, it's solved forever. You know, in other words, we sign a contract, I buy something from you, or you sell something, that's it, you know, and then it's done. The other one, which is a good example, would be Polish-German relations. I think you can say, look, this is never going to be solved. In other words, it's never going to be a quote-unquote normal relationship, but one can find ways to mitigate problems, understanding that agreements signed today may need to be revised in one generation because perceptions vary. I think we saw that, for example, with the comfort women. Sexual slavery several generations ago was considered to be something that was part of war, you know, just happened like the rain. Now it's obviously perceived very differently. Same thing with the 65 agreement. Because it was signed by an autocratic government in many South Koreans consider it the way Japanese looked at the unequal treaties with the West. And therefore, it's going to have to be renegotiated, and maybe in 30 or 40 years, other issues will evolve. So I'm just wondering how you think that Tokyo policymakers look at this.
So especially regarding the so-called history issue, I think that the Japanese government position is quite consistent and never change in the near future. So as you may know, the comfort woman issue and wartime labor issue is in a way very different type of issue. So regarding the wartime labor issue, actually, I think that not only the Japanese government, but only I think that this issue should be solved by the South Korea's effort, because the wartime labor issue was the agenda of the negotiation between Tokyo and Seoul in the process of the normalization. So there was on the agenda, but the comfort woman issue was difficult. There was not discussed in the process of the normalization. So in this context, the Japanese government always stick the position that regarding the wartime labor issue, this issue the solved in 1965, the accord. But regarding comfort woman issue, yes, the Japanese government cannot take the responsibility, but the Japanese government show the sincerity toward the former comfort woman. In this context, Japanese government actually made additional effort to heal wounds of the former comfort woman. Then they reached the 2015 comfort woman agreement. This was an additional effort from Japanese perspective, but the wartime labor issue should include the 1965 the accord. In this context, Japanese government stance is quite consistent, and I personally understand this position of the Japanese government. But at this point, I want to say that if we really want to restore our relationship, I think that the Japanese government, Prime Minister Kishida, should show his sincerity in addressing the history issue between Tokyo and Seoul. Yes, South Korean government should solve this compensation issue regarding the wartime labor, but Japanese sincerity is quite important. When President Yoon persuade his national citizen and former wartime laborers, without Japanese sincerity, it's quite difficult, and it's in a way impossible for President Yoon to persuade his domestic citizen. So in this context, joint effort, not only South Korea's effort, but also the Japanese side effort is quite needed at this point.
Thank you for the talk. My name is Misato. I run educational program between Japan, China, South Korea. And I have a question about the education, since you have mentioned about the sentiments between Japan and ROK, and you say that education is the key. And I personally agree education is the key, but when I talk about education, I personally am hopeful about informal education, meaning that education run by maybe non-profit organizations or international organization, which is out of the government's control. And since you are also the educator, my question to you is, what is your approach or views about these kind of educations? Because this kind of education, it's out of the government, and people can encourage the discussion and engagement of younger generation. But at the same time, I often feel that when we do such programs, always the same kinds of people participate, meaning college graduate who has experience abroad and who has a similar kinds of view. So I think that's one of the difficulties for Japan, our relations as well, because we are always in the same bubble. So my question to you is, what is your approach or views about this kind of educations and the future perspective about this? Thank you.
Thank you for a very important question. I think that the direct interaction between younger generation in not only Japan, South Korea, and China is quite important. So in this context, this is a governmental effort, but so Campus Asia, right? Campus Asia is quite important. So this program really realized direct communication between the younger generation in 3 countries. This kind of the program is quite important. But yes, as you mentioned, the private sector, the foster more. How can I say, interaction between the younger generation. I would say that in my experience, frank discussion. The first three is quite important. So the second, if possible, jointly, they should jointly study the unfortunate past between the two countries. So this kind of very cautious approaches are quite needed. Frankly speaking, now many younger generation, especially the university students, not only in Keio but also in South Korea, only pay attention to the kind of pop culture to the Japan and South Korea. But now is the time to know more about not only the pop culture but also the other countries. So in this context, anyhow, the direct communication between the younger generation is quite important.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. At this point, I'd like to ask Saoka-san to bring in some questions from the larger audience. Thank you.
Sure. We have a question from Ananda-san, who is the chairman of Law and Justice Club in Sri Lanka. She's very happy to meet you. She says, I strongly believe that Japan and ROK relations are very significant for the Indo-Pacific region. I believe that the Japanese government and the South Korean government should look for common strategic interests ahead to seek for a creative diplomacy. Can't we go for a U.S.-Japan ROK trilateralism? How can U.S. find a common stage by involving U.S. contribution over this issue?
Thank you for the question. Yes, actually, I was in Hawaii last week to attend the trilateral meeting among Japan, South Korea, and the United States. Yes, especially under the Biden administration, current U.S. administration is quite happy to, in a way, play a significant role in mending tie between Tokyo and Seoul. I really appreciate U.S. This kind of U.S. effort. But anyhow, outstanding issues should be solved by bilateral effort in Tokyo and Seoul. But in fostering the acknowledgement of the common strategic interest, yes, U.S. should play a role. In this context, I'm quite happy to see current frequent consultative meeting among three countries. And again, as I said earlier, one of the important factors is that the new South Korean government security and foreign policy. Actually, frankly speaking, I would say that Moon administration's foreign and security policy was too much focused on the Korean Peninsula, inter-Korean relations. But now Yoon government is quite different. So the Yoon government really show its interest to sustain the rule-based international order. Actually, the policy direction, foreign policy direction, is quite same in Japan and South Korea. We really take advantage of this kind of situation. So in this context, the Biden administration now I think making quite extensive effort to foster trilateral relations, not only in the context of the addressing North Korean issue, but also in the sustaining rule-based order in the Pacific.
Yes, if I may add, I think that one of the underappreciated aspect of Japan-ROK relations might be that despite some incidences that occur sometimes, the strategic or the military-to-military, especially level, since they're both strong allies of the U.S., are actually quite strong, and that there's a lot of mutual interest. There's an understanding that there's a mutual interest at the military-to-military level, and that has been sort of a stable factor in a relatively volatile relationship over the years than one might think. And one of the examples that I think I'm hoping will start if it had not been the case during COVID is that I know that a group of officer candidates from the Japan Ground Self-Defense Forces visits Korea post-graduation, and they get to know each other and see so many commonalities in a way, because both forces have been prioritize US-ROK, US-Japan relations. There's a lot in common that they can talk about. And those kind of things, I hope, that both the political environment and the COVID environment will make it possible for that level of exchange to revive and that to be a base for the relationship going forward. Because I think, as you mentioned, the change in the Yoon administration's strategic or security policy is very significant in sort of making the overall environment for the bilateral relationship towards a more common direction than otherwise. So that, I think, is very important.
Thank you very much. Noah Snyder from The Economist. I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about how, in your experience, folks on the sort of right wing of the LDP, the part of the party that's opposed to or more resistant to repairing the relationship, how they see Korea strategically. I mean, do they think that simply Japan doesn't need Korea for an Indo-Pacific strategy? Do they think that Japan can sort of make do without Korea? Because it seems often just to be a glaring gap in the strategic vision from people who are otherwise concerned about the same sets of problems: China, North Korea, the alliance with the US. I mean, on the Korean side, you have at least some ideological coherence in the sense that people who are opposed to, or people who are more hostile towards Japan also tend to be more hostile towards the US-Japan alliance, also tend to be tilting more towards China, and so on. On the Japanese side, it's the very same people who are concerned about China, who want a stronger US alliance, who seem to have a blind spot when it comes to Korea. So I was hoping you could say a bit more about why you think that is.
So in my sense, the South Korea is quite important part for the Japan's foreign and security policy, and we cannot ignore our relationship with South Korea. But frankly speaking, now the many politicians and even the policy maker tend to ignore this important bilateral ties. I really hope that the Japanese strategists, so-called strategists, emphasize its importance of our bilateral ties. But at the same time, I think that many policymakers and the political leader quite understand that our relationship with South Korea is quite strategically quite important. So given this the understanding, the Prime Minister Kishida and his foreign policy advisors try to cautiously improve its relationship with South Korea, and I hope that we can see more tangible result in bilateral ties. And so when we see the past 8 years, especially under Abe cabinet, so the relationship with South Korea is quite downgraded, as you may know. In the national security strategy in 2013, actually quite underscored our relationship with South Korea. But when we see the National Program Defense Guideline in 2008, our relationship with South Korea is quite downgraded. So we needed to change this kind of the order. So in this context, this year is quite important. Now, after the election, Kishida cabinet is revise the important security 3 documents, national security strategies. So in this context, I really hope that Kishida cabinet, Japanese government, again put its emphasis on its relationship with South Korea.
Jennifer Rogers with the Asia Society Arts Committee. When I think about, you were saying with Japan, the U.S. alliance, Korea, and how that plays out with China and trying to balance all of the different interests, one of the issues is you don't have to take sides. And I was thinking the North Korea issue with China not really embracing the unification. I think the South Korea, the new government, seems less intense about that. But how do you see if North Korea really increases its aggression or goes a little bit more, becomes prominent again, how destabilizing do you think that will be, or how difficult will that be for Japan relative to maintaining sort of the strategic alliance with Korea and balancing that against China? I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, from your vantage point, what do you think will be the biggest threat to sort of Japan trying to balance improving relationships with, South Korea and maintaining the U.S. alliance and the China dynamic as it stands?
So thank you for the question. Regarding the North Korea issue, actually I'm not so afraid that the Japanese and South Korean government how can I say, widening gap in addressing North Korea issue, because the Yoon government will take quite continue to take quite a tough stance toward North Korea and try to enhance the deterrence capability vis-a-vis North Korea's military threat. In this context, we, Japan, South Korea, and the United States can make joint effort to take countermeasure in a way vis-a-vis North Korea. But the China policy is a bit difficult. As I mentioned earlier, even the conservative government, such as Yoon administration, South Korea needed to quite cautiously address China issue. But the many South Korea, in my sense, if Japan and the United States can give, in a way, assurance to South Korea, kind of security assurance to South Korea. In this case, South Korea make more extensive effort to take joint effort vis-a-vis China. So one of the nightmare for many South Koreans is that kind of the retaliation from China, such as in '97, after the SALT deployment. At that time, many South Koreans say that in 2017, actually, at that time, Trump administration did nothing after the retaliation from China. So South Korea had to tackle this difficult China issue by itself. But I think Biden administration is difficult. Biden administration could make a joint effort when South Korea really have kind of the retaliation from China. And Japan could do. So if we can make strong front vis-a-vis China, South Korean government can take more important step in its China policy.
Yeah, Jacques Magnan with Asia Society. So you mentioned that what you've noticed when you discuss with your students that there might be some gap of historical knowledge between Japanese people and Korean people. And because it's very difficult to move forward when you don't have the same historical fact basis, so to speak, what do you think, and if anything, Japan should do in terms of history education to kind of close this gap? Because it's, again, it's very difficult to, knowing the historical fact, and it's always been very political, the way history is taught. I can relate to that as the way historical facts were taught in France and in Europe. It changed a lot. So do you think in Japan, the way history is taught should be adjusted to kind of facilitate the reconciliation, so to speak?
Yes, sorry, Johnny from the Art Foundation. As a practical step, we're talking a lot about education of the young people to further close the gap and the past history. About 30, 40 years ago, Australia, in this effort, made it an option at all high schools to study Japanese language in addition to English, French, German, other European languages. In the States also you don't have Japanese, which they should, or Chinese. They have German, French, Spanish historically. Do you think it's a good idea to close the gap is to make Korean an optional language, foreign language study in Japanese high schools? One thing I was thinking, and the other thing I was thinking, there's still some housing discrimination in Japan against Koreans when they're applying for an apartment or something, but it's all hush-hush, not talked about. So the government should make a stronger campaign against discrimination in Japan, all non-Japanese or upper-class Japanese, and maybe change the jargon, because the old name for Korea, as we know, is Chosen, but in modern times it's become a bit derogatory. Like in the States, you don't say Negro anymore. You say Black or African American. But still, Japan refers to South Korea as Kangoku and North Korea as Kita Chosen. And so should this be uniformed and a more politically correct terminology be used? Those are just some thoughts.
So final thoughts too. Thank you.
So thank you for these two questions. So the personal thought is that yes, history education is quite important, but I personally think that government, not only Japanese government but also South Korean government, should not strongly intervene in the history education. So we needed to have more the diversified view in history issue. But in case of South Korea, history issue really in kind of the national history of South Korea. So as South Korean government, in a way, strongly shape its history. But unfortunately, in my personal view, the same things now is in a way happening in Japan. So I think that the government should not strongly intervene in the history issue. But and at the same time, yes, we should learn more about unfortunate past. But at the same time, as I said earlier, we also should learn over 50 years joint effort to develop our bilateral ties. This kind of the effort is quite important. And my last comment is that apart from the history education, one of the problem when we talk about difficult bilateral tie is that sustainability. Actually, so now in Japan, so more than 10 years, we have a kind of career fatigue. Main reason is that sustainability, I think. So every 5 years, we can see, in a way, vibrant change of administration in South Korea. But this change really, past 10 years, had given a negative impact on our bilateral ties. So then now many Japanese think that yes, we want to restore our bilateral ties, but is this really sustainable? So we really consider our bilateral ties in the aspect of sustainability. So in this context, yes, Kishida-san could take strong leadership in restoring our bilateral ties, but at the same time, we needed to take, in a way, long time to restore our bilateral tie and, in a way, real, healthy bilateral relationship.
Thank you. So I guess we end with we should have reasonable expectations. and to be carefully optimistic about the bilateral relationship going forward. So I'm sorry I went over time a bit, but thank you so much for joining us, Professor Nishino. We'd like to end with a round of applause for Professor Nishino. Thank you very much.